If you want, you can turn your Bibles open to Hebrews 11, verses 30 through 31. Is this thing on, or am I just talking to myself? It's crazy. Anyway, let's try that again. So if you want to be quiet and turn your Bibles open to Hebrews chapter 11. Verse 30 and 31. We're gonna back up a little bit, and then we'll work our way to our text. But so last week we ended on talking about by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days, and by faith Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. Now, one thing that we didn't talk about last week, but that you can see here when kind of like keeping the same structure of the idea of by faith and right after you find out who did what by faith, and then you see what they did. And so by faith Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies. You could get rid of the negatives here, and it would sound something more like this. By faith, Rahab the harlot was saved with those who were obedient. You can kind of see it that way instead of with the negatives. And that really goes hand in hand with everything we've been talking about with faith, which is this constant conversation of faith working with your decisions in your daily life and how you're acting. That it's not just that you're saying you trust in God, but you're also living a life that expresses trust in God. That what she did, and the reason she wasn't swept away, was because she said that she stuck out and said, I know who the God of Israel is. I've heard about your God. And she wanted to not be obliterated. She wanted to come alongside those people and say, I don't want to be a part of Jericho when it falls. I would like to be spared. And her humility and coming close to God is what saved her. So she hid the spies. She welcomed the spies. I like the way it's worded. And then she was showing obedience, and that's why the spies were saved, and that's why she was saved as well. So he goes on and he says, what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, or of David and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises. And so we'll stop there for just a moment. The writer has reached an end of giving specific examples about how these people from Scripture acted in faith while trusting in the Word and the promises of God. And now he begins to summarize, because of time's sake. Time will fail me if I continue to tell verse 32. So he's shifting a gear here. On how he's breaking down. It's not, he basically is saying it's no longer going to be by faith, someone did something and therefore they were saved. He's not going to say that exact same pattern now. We're shifting to a different pattern, and he tells you right up front why. Because he doesn't have the time to keep speaking to every individual in this way. So these next comments are generalized and they're summarized points and kind of the previous points as well. What these people accomplished was by faith or by faithfulness. So that's what he says here. Performed who by faith, so now it's kind of generalized, and then goes and lists quite a few things, and he just keeps listing them. And what they accomplished was by righteousness as well, which we should see, because the basic promise upon which this entire discussion is based on is that when Christ comes, it will be those who were deemed righteous by their faithfulness who will live and escape destruction. Hebrews 10:37-38 and Habakkuk 2:3-4. So, and we'll bring that up here in just a bit. But the list here is interesting. So, if you look in verse 32 and you look at the list, it says Gideon was the fifth judge of Israel. Or no, it says that Gideon, and I want to go through this list and talk about these briefly, giving you a reminder of who they are. So Gideon was the fifth judge of Israel. He defeated a great force of the Midianites with just 300 men in Judges 7, right? Barak was the general under Deborah, the woman judge, who defeated the Canaanites, Judges 4. Samson was the 13th judge. He was a Nazirite from birth, and he afflicted the Philistines greatly, Judges 14. Jephthah was the 9th judge. He defeated the Ammonites. Also, he was one who made the rash vow concerning his victory, which resulted in the death of his daughter. David, we know who David is. He's the only king mentioned, however, and he was, I would say, the best and the greatest of those kings in the Old Testament. He had a great faith in God, and he demonstrated this by his fight with Goliath as just one thing when he was younger and continued in much faith when he was older. Samuel was the 15th and last judge of Israel. He was probably the greatest judge in Israel as far as righteousness is concerned of his time. Okay. So it's tempting to see this list as nothing more than 6 individuals. So I'll erase some of this and just highlight this. It's tempting to look at this list as nothing more than just a person drawing names out of a hat that first came to them when they were writing this down. That's what's tempting. This could have just been for us randomized picks when you say, who are people of faith in the Old Testament? Well, there's so many to choose from, so here's a few. But the writer isn't just writing whatever he wants, is he? He is guided by the Spirit of God to write down exactly what God wanted him to write. And that's what we believe. And so with that thought in mind, it should be appropriate then that this is not a random list, that none of this is randomized. It can't be. And that God picked specific people to put within the hall of faith for you and I, for our purposes today, for their purposes back then. And with that in mind, what about this list then maybe jumps out at you? With that thought in mind, what are some interesting things about this list? That's for sure. That's a great point. And we will definitely come around to that for sure, and we'll be there in just a second. So we'll touch upon that. It's a great answer.
It allows us to have a realization that, all of these people were broken in some way, and so are we.
Yep.
And so, for me, it feels like, if I have faith, I can be on this list too.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously not in the biblical sense, but mentally, I can see that even though they were flawed, all these individuals were flawed in some way.
Sure.
It still allows us to believe that we can be part of all of that.
Yeah, I think those are great answers. Great answers. So one thing that jumped out at me, and it really, really bothers me. I'm serious. It bothers me so much. But this is so close, okay? I sat there and looked at it. I looked at the Greek and different stuff and tried to but he's mentioned 3 judges or 4 judges, and then he's mentioned David and Samuel. If you switch around that just slightly, Samuel is known as the true last judge, right? And then in Samuel's time, Saul comes, the first king. But he's not really. Like, he's a king for a short period of time. But historically, Saul does not make the list of Hall of Faith. Why? Because we have very little that can make us conclude that Saul turned from his wicked ways. God gave him so many chances. So many chances. And so immediately with Samuel is, Saul, you're no longer God's anointed. It's David. David will be God's anointed. He will be the one. And it is so close of the order that it just drives me nuts. It's like if you just switch these two, and then I don't remember which one it is. I think it's like you switch these two. But the point stands. It's still the same point, which is we're talking about a big, long period of time that he is talking about, kind of jumping from about where he stopped, which is from going over the fathers of faith and going to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and talking about these things, and then kind of branching off from that and saying a long period of time between that, the judges and into the kings, there were faithful people of God. But I think so that's one point, that he was covering this long list of people there. And then I think it's also that what you both just brought up, which is that if I were to pick out of my human standard a list of judges who I think are making this list, I would agree with some. I would probably only agree with two. Yeah. The other two, insane. That's not me speaking like I know better than God. It's for a purpose. I think it's for a purpose because it's so, what? Like Jephthah, he made it. Samson, he made it. They were some of the judges. They were some of the worst judges. I mean, they just were. And we talked about this when we went through Judges, that I'm not saying they didn't show faith in their life. They did. Samson, probably in the most pathetic fashion, but did show faith. But I think it's for that reason. God's like, this is the hall of faith, but I'm not putting all the people who you think are going to be there. Why? Because that is not going to be very encouraging to you and me. That's not going to really help us the way that the writer's trying to help us, which is to keep going forward. And so God can say from his position, whether you realize it or not, all of these did it in faith. All of them. They all did it in faith. And you're like, well, maybe I have a chance. And on top of all of that, we have Jesus. We have Jesus Christ. And there is this great assurance that we're given because of that, this great confidence that helps us to pick up and keep moving forward without this guilt of failure of the old law. We have a freedom in Christ that gives us vigor and strength to keep moving forward. And so I think that's all really, really important to realize that, Samson and Jephthah, David is amazing, but he's a perfect choice for this because David is greatly flawed, greatly. But he was a man after God's own heart. He loved the Lord. He did love the Lord. And it was obvious as well. As obvious as David's flaws were, it was also equally as obvious how much he loved God. And the same with Samuel. I would say Samuel is actually probably one of those people who you look and say, that guy's pretty clean. This guy's got a pretty clean rep. You look back on Samuel's life and say that he was really devoted. But what was one of the most heinous things that kind of really just gets stuck on Samuel, no matter how you can try to work around it? And what was the direct cause of that? So what was probably, if you look at Samuel's life, what would you say was his failure?
The lack of discipline in his children?
Yes. He followed exactly in Eli's footsteps. Now, we could get into a lot here, and we're not going to. Like, for example, the curse, family curse of tradition. You have to break family curses. He was taken very young out of his mom and dad's house. They could have maybe done better. He could have maybe done better seeing Hannah and his dad work, but he stuck with Eli the priest, and Eli completely failed Israel with his sons. And then there's Samuel, who stands in the midst of that and redeems Israel, but then grows up, and his sons are the direct result of why the people wanted a king. And so you look at Samuel on one side and you say, he was this guy holding back and saying, we don't need a king. Simultaneously, the reason that really aggravated the people was the high priest. His sons were completely worthless sons, and they were doing a terrible job, and they were corrupting Israel anyway, and that's what pushed them to want a king. And that's pretty rough. It's a pretty rough thing to have to deal with. So Samuel, even in the midst of, I think he was a very, very, very faithful person. He was flawed. He has things that still cling to him and needs the mercy of God. Needs, God's grace through these things. So, okay, that's important. Hopefully that gives you some strength there, because it definitely gives me strength when I think on those things. So these people, verse 33, performed acts of righteousness and obtained promises, because, as the writer said when he introduced this discussion, that those who have done the will of God, being deemed righteous by their faith, receive what is promised by him. So that's right here. He goes back. This is all the way back in Hebrews 10. I've just got it on the screen because I think it's really important. That's what this chapter keeps touching back on, is this last part of Hebrews. You have need of endurance. That's what he's trying to give them in chapter 11. So that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. So when you do the will of God, you may receive what is promised. This is the way that God breaks it down. This is much different than what the world says, that our faith, when it's working correctly, that we are doing the will of God. Not perfectly, but doing it. We are trying to do what he says. We are a people who care about God, care about what he has told us to do, what he has told us to not do. And that as we are striving towards that, we should have a confidence that you may receive what was promised. However, if you don't strive for that, then you should not have an assurance of what was promised. It's not about perfection, but it is about this place where you get in, where you say, well, I don't really care to do anything that God says. I don't really care to listen to him, but he'll save me. I don't know why we can get ourselves in that place, because really those should be when we're pumping the brakes and saying, God, please save me. Please help me. Please bring the love of you in my heart again. Help me to remember my first love, so that I will cling to you, and so that I will depend on you, and I will trust in you and not in my own power and my arrogance to do what I want to do, but that I will try to seek you with all of my might. Though I am flawed, I love you and I want to do your will. That is David. That is who David is. Like, how many psalms, how many prayers that he has to touch upon the fact that he's obviously so far short of what he needs to be. Yet his prayer is, restore me, Lord. Restore me. Show me the hidden sins. And even if they're hidden, forgive them. Why does he care about hidden sins? Because he's proactive with ones that are obvious. He's on his knees with ones that are obvious, but there's places where he's saying, but the hidden sins, show me even those, or forgive me of those. And then he has humility, that even when he does something awful, he writes a whole psalm about it. That, is it Psalm 51, I think? Psalm 51. The whole psalm is about what he did with Bathsheba. Whole psalm. Would we want to do that? The thing that we want to run from and hide? He is guided by God to put this down forever of what he did. That's who David is. It's his heart. His heart is constantly, continuously trying, getting back up. That is the way of God's people. Get back up. God has given you grace. He has given you the chance to come to him in prayer. He's given you the chance to say, please help me. So we got to continue to get back up. Okay. So when we go back to here, you'll see, and we'll read about the mouths of the lions, right? Shut the mouths of the lions. Now, it's important we back up here for a second. Sometimes we see names given in 32, and we think that's who he's beginning to talk about with the first few verses following the list in 33. But it isn't. That's not what's going on. He already said he doesn't have time, which he says right up here, to go into individual people. And so he is not going directly into Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. That's not what the first people he's talking about. And it is quite confusing because some of these things he says, it kind of starts you off with thinking that way. Conquered kingdoms, that could be David. And then shut the mouths of lions. So conquered kingdoms, now that we realize on this list could be David, could be Jephthah, could be one of the other judges, but even shutting the mouth of lions. Who could you accidentally think of, or who could you think of about shutting the mouth of lions with someone on that list? On that list. If you think for a second, there's two moments. There's Samson, when you could think, well, didn't Samson shut the mouth of lions? And no, he didn't. He actually tore the mouth of a lion off or apart. But that's interesting because if you're thinking in your mind, you could be like, well, that's Samson. Judges 14, 5 through 6, he actually went the other way. He's tearing it apart. Well, what about David? You're sitting here thinking, oh, isn't there a verse? Yes, there is a verse. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and took the lamb from the flock, I went out after him, attacked him, rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his fur, that's by his beard, and struck him and killed him. 1 Samuel 17, 34 through 35. Now, once again, this is not shutting the mouths of lions. It's actually a word that literally means is a lamb in his mouth. And David says, nope. To a bear or a lion, he's ripping this lamb out of its mouth, and God gives him the strength. So once again, that's opening the mouth of a lion. So we know then, shutting the mouth of lions, when we go back and we look and we say, okay, so that's none of those, it's because we oftentimes miss this right here. Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. That just opens up to a lot of other people who he is about to talk about, who he's about to zoom in on. And so now, shutting the mouth of lions, it's Daniel. His faithfulness as he's thrown into the lion's den, but it's not just his faithfulness while being thrown in. It resulted in God shutting the lion's mouth, Daniel 6. Then quenching the power of fire. Who's that? Yeah, the writer's mind is already by Daniel. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I think that's exactly who that is. Could very well be referring to Daniel's friends in the fiery furnace. Hebrews 11:34 and Daniel 3:17. Escaped the edge of the sword. I'll just tell you, it's impossible to tell exactly who this is by this event, because there's tons of people who escaped the edge of the sword, I'm sure, at one point or another, trusting in God during times of turmoil and betrayal. But David is definitely one who comes to mind, that he escaped the edge of the sword, specifically, multiple times, in various ways, as he's running alone and being abandoned and being betrayed by all around him except God. So from weakness we're made strong. Perhaps this refers to, who do you think that could be referred to? Say it again. Gideon, it's good. Strength in the form that he tested God, got the assurance, got the strength, moved forward. It's good. Who else could it be? Think more in physical. Samson. It could be back to Samson, or it could be speaking spiritual. We don't know for sure. But both are good things for your mind to go back to. From weakness was made strong. Could be both that we're referencing here. Became mighty in war. Once again, could be potentially Joshua, is the way my mind goes to. But it also may refer to someone like Saul, or more likely David, or other kings who did God's will. I have a tendency to not think it's Saul because he could have been put in the list up there and he wasn't. But I don't know. Put foreign armies to flight. Could likely be, once again, Joshua in the Battle of Jericho. It could be David. So women received back their dead by resurrection. Well, that should be one you know. Who's that about? Yeah, so that's going to be about the widow of Zarephath. It's going to be about Elijah. Elijah being the prophet that was able to do this, and also the woman as well, the widow, receiving back her dead by resurrection. She also had faith in Zarephath at other moments, even if it wasn't in that moment. Others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they may obtain a better resurrection. So he keeps with this idea of resurrection. We don't know exactly who that would be. So there are people who, it's difficult to determine for sure the events here that the writer had in mind. It could be those who are suffering in this life, that they're receiving something back much better in the resurrection. Perhaps it's the better country of Hebrews 11:16, or the better and lasting possession that was referenced back in Hebrews 10:34. Perhaps it simply means that something along these lines, instead of being given back their life here on earth, accepting their release to a sinful world, they would be given back their life in heaven, and that is assuredly a better resurrection, right? It's like being resurrected in the sense of, he's using resurrection, I think, in the sense of they were given back their dead. This is a physical resurrection. Others were tortured, not accepting their release. So that's interesting. So that they may obtain a better resurrection. It's kind of like he's saying they could have had their life back. What would that mean? Well, it would mean you curse God and don't believe in him anymore. Turn away from him, and we'll let you live. Well, it says there were people who had that option, and instead they said, you're going to have to just kill me. I'm not giving up God. So they could have, in one sense, had their life back, but they chose the better resurrection, to die in faith, to have resurrection in eternal life. Others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains of imprisonment. Once again, this all goes together. These could be all kinds of people. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. This is definitely getting into where you can see he is talking for time's sake in generalities. He is just really, it gets to a point where you're like, I have no idea. I know no idea who you could be talking about all of them. But this one is really interesting right here. They were sawn in two. So Justin Martyr, in his writings with Trypho, the Jew that he was writing to, he's called Trypho the Jew, mentions the death of Isaiah, whom you, that is the Jews, sawed asunder with a wooden saw. That's Justin Martyr in his dialogue with Trypho. You can find that document. And so we don't know if he's going off of Jewish historian, a Josephus type of historian there and going off of hearsay. But by the time of Justin Martyr, which was early centuries, who people usually credit somewhat of value to their writings of early church fathers, he says to this guy that you know very well that the Jews ripped him asunder, that you sawed him in half with a wooden saw. So that's really harsh, but that could have actually been Isaiah. I think I heard Phil say it. So that could be Isaiah the prophet there. We don't know for sure. It is interesting, though. Whether it's specific people or speaking in general, these were the kind of sufferings that those who were faithful in God endured. And that's really the point. You don't have to know every single person. They went about in sheepskin, in goat skin, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not worthy. We, of course, had woman mentioned here. It's not just men, it's just speaking in general. Humans of who the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. So these great heroes of faith suffered greatly, and the world was not worthy of them. Think about that statement for a moment. We've talked about this in the past in a sermon, but think about this statement. You know, I think about this a lot. God is writing this. God is the one guiding this pen. And God just said, these people the world was not worthy of. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty incredible. What's even more incredible is that the writer is saying that you and I can be in that list, that you and I can be of the faithful, and that God would say, if you're living a life of faith and that you're truly dedicating yourself to Him, if you're one of the ones that are willing to suffer for the cause of Christ, if you're willing to make Him a big part of your life and not some small part, but something that actually is doing what He says even when it's challenging, if you're one of those people who are noble enough to accept that call, that God would say the world was not worthy of you, that you were a great blessing in the world. And that's something to hold on to. Maybe not to think of in yourself in a way of self-exaltation, but in a way of we can certainly look around to each other and say, a person has awesome faith, and the Lord is doing great things in them. And when terrible things happen to that person, maybe one of the first things you think is the world wasn't worthy of that person. Truly wasn't. I think about that all the time when I think about someone like my grandmas, just very naturally had very difficult lives. Just some of the most beaming, beautiful women there ever was. They're the reason I'm faithful today, by far. By far. The world didn't deserve them. So I think we all have people like that. And I could say it about my mom and dad, about my wife, about my, but it's just the point. These are things we feel. I feel about a lot of you. We can feel these ways about each other. So, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. I think it goes hand in hand with the other things that's been expressed. But verse 16, but as it is, they desire a better country. I want to take this back with this thought in mind, men of whom, or people of whom the world was not worthy. And if you go back up to, I think it's verse 16, he says, but as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. The idea of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah and these people being sojourners, walking the earth as strangers, not desiring for this to be their resting place, but rather striving to reach the goal of heaven, to be at home with God. Because of this, God is not ashamed to be called their God. This is why the world was not worthy of them, because they were no longer a part of the world. They had been called out of it through faith in Jesus. So if you look at this verse, and you look back at John 17 and Jesus' prayer, 14 and following, he says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. There's this beautiful idea then, that as you no longer are of this world, that you become a sojourner. You join in with the fact that this world is not my home. And I'm pressing through. I'm going somewhere else. I'm letting go of this place. This is not where I want to be. I want to strive not to stay here, but to go home with God. And when we make those decisions and we live a life according to that passion, that he simultaneously says that he is not ashamed to be called our God, and that the world doesn't deserve us. I think it's really cool, really beautiful. Those are some encouraging words, that how God feels about his faithful children. We'll finish up here and we'll be done. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. So this is the rest of the verses. So, and though these all had testimony born to them by their faithfulness, they did not receive what was promised. That's one of the things he says. He's like, all these people, even though they had this idea given to them about promises, that they didn't receive it. They were holding on to that promise because God was going to give it to them in the future. They were longing for it, and God still was keeping his promise. But God foresaw something better for us, so that without us they would not be made complete. These are the ancients or the elders that had witness born to them because of their faithfulness, Hebrews 11:2. And an example given earlier is Abel, of whom it says, God bearing witness to him in regards to his gifts. So all the ancient people of faith had good testimony given to them there. But many of the promises given to the great heroes of faith were so far-reaching promises, like the promise of Abraham, the promise of the new covenant, the promise of a better sacrifice, Genesis 22, Jeremiah 31, Psalm 40. They couldn't see the full outcome of those promises in their lifetime. They never participated in the new covenant or gained confidence from the sacrifice of Christ, yet they remained faithful to God. And so, in a way, what I think this means is all of these now become those who, the very next verse, are rooting from heaven for us, who are saying, we made it, come join us. They're beckoning us home. They're saying, you can do it too. And I think all this talk right here of did not receive what was promised because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. I think it's saying we're going to the same place as them. This is not finished till we're all home. It's, they're receiving their promise and you'll receive your promise. And that's a promise. We're going to be called up to God in glory, and we are going to be in this together. It's not going to be that they didn't receive those promises, but only we can. It's the notion that from Christ and the cross, it goes all the way back to anyone who was faithful in the time of God, of what they knew at that time, all the way forward to those who are faithful in God past the cross. Jesus made a way for them to be in heaven one day. He made a way for the promises to come true and to be given to them. Okay, is there any questions? We finished up Hebrews 11, and it was great. I'm glad we took our time with it. It's really good stuff there. Hopefully it's an encouragement. I will, with the couple minutes left, I'll just read a few of these verses, and then I'll just let you go. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, Let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which is so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Good stuff. Very good stuff. Can't wait to get to it. So we'll get to that next week and read it, study that, have some questions and comments. We'll go into chapter 12. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. I gave you a minute back, a minute early. Did you see that? That's right.